I don't understand that kind of senseless violence. But even from a rational point of view, if you have a beef or an argument, you think somehow your arguments can be made more legitimate by killing civilians? No, I think if anything, it does the opposite. It unifies the world against these people.
That's what do you think the motive would be? Why do this? They know what Israel's going to do.
Yeah, I don't understand it because terrorism, is supposed to strike fear, but they ultimately have a goal. But I don't know. I think really, actually, in the last 20 years, as we've seen terrorism happening, probably starting with 9/11, and terrorists have seen our response to it, or the West's response to it, or Israel's response to it. I don't know how they imagine that they're doing their cause any good, because it really does unify. I think 9/11 unified the world against,
Right.
Osama bin Laden and the jihadists. And I think this will unify the world as well. Now, it is interesting still to see some of the response from some of the Middle Eastern countries who aren't quite as unified, saying it's Israel's fault.
Well, of course. And there are people here that have been pro-Palestinian rallies here in the U.S.
Yeah, it seems like they all go to Harvard. So, but it's hard to imagine that, and their arguments become less potent, when you see the death and carnage that has no real justification.
Well, they're going to point to, especially if Israel does a ground invasion, and there are civilian casualties as a result of all of what Israel's doing in retaliation. This has happened many times before, where they demand Israel stop because civilians are being killed, and then they'll accuse them of targeting Palestinians.
And it's virtually an impossible situation from a military or a logistical point of view, going into a big city like this and trying to find these people, because they'll disappear into the tunnels, they'll disappear into civilian populations. And no, it's going to be a bloody mess. But it's a bloody mess started by people who wanted to kill women and children. And, I think they have no leg to stand on, the terrorists.
Hostages. There are some Americans believed being held. Hamas has threatened to execute them. They've even threatened to make it public. This is a very difficult situation, but if there are Americans, would you support the U.S. military going in to try to rescue them?
I think it's best not to make a comment yet on what's happening. We need to know who's being held. And the other thing about telling people what you're going to do is it may not actually help the cause. Most of the time, things like this, you can think back to the Iranian hostages. Some of it was done, secretly, and then some of it failed, before it finally succeeded. So I think that it's best not conjecturing on that, but I think that the hostages deserve to be saved, and I hope that there is a way they can be saved. But it's going to be complicated. You've got 100,000 Israeli troops massing out there, and I think they're going to destroy the infrastructure of Hamas, and I think Hamas is going to get what they deserve.
Now, as far as supporting Israel, we're not going to be putting our own troops there, but we're going to be sending more help, more munitions. Do you support that?
Well, we've had a long-standing, special relationship with Israel, including armaments and sharing technology for decades now, and that will continue, and I do support that.
Okay. We've had a big battle and a debate in our country about the support for Ukraine, and that war is still going on with Russia, and the debate about whether or not to send more ammunition. Does that get more complicated with Israel?
Well, I think there's going to be some question of whether or not Hamas is using any weapons that we actually sent to Ukraine to begin with. So there's a question of oversight of whether or not the corruption.
You think that's happened? Do you think our weapons have gotten to Gaza?
There are people saying that. We're going to wait and see what the evidence shows on that. But I've been one who's been a stickler for more oversight of the weapons and the dollars going into Ukraine to make sure they're not. There have been public reports of arms dealers making off with our weapons, that some of the weapons that are given to Ukraine. My point has always been that any kind of aid, even to our allies, we need to be very careful that we're not bankrupting ourselves in the process. We really have a terrible financial situation in our country where we spend about 1.5 trillion more than comes in. And so anything really needs to be done in the context of trying to balance. So anytime they've asked for more arms for Ukraine or even for Israel, I say, let's take it from somewhere else. One of the things I suggested a year or two ago is when Afghan war was over and we left and Biden left in such a terrible fashion, there was still like $3 billion sitting in an Afghan reconstruction fund. I tried to take that in order that could actually be used for Iron Dome payments. And the Democrats objected to it. They said, oh, no. And I said, well, isn't some of this going to go to the Taliban? They said, oh, no, we're going to humanitarian groups. But there's stuff like that throughout our government. What I keep asking is take it from someplace where it's doing harm and put it into a place that would do more good.
Because you face criticism for blocking funding for the Iron Dome, which ultimately Iron Dome funding did occur, correct?
Right. Basically, I never blocked it. I offered to pay for it, and the Democrats rejected paying for it. So it's sort of a war of words where people say, oh, you blocked it. And I said, well, no. I offered unanimous consent to actually have it happen, $1 billion, but take that $1 billion from money that was going to the Taliban, and the Democrats objected to it. So I think sometimes it depends on the perspective of who's reporting, whether or not that's reported as blocking, or you could easily write the same headline, Democrats block Rand Paul from funding Iron Dome because they won't pay for it from Taliban money.
Right. No, I understand. Are we still funding for humanitarian purposes anything in Afghanistan that you're
we estimated there's still several $100 million in a fund going to Afghanistan. And there are reports of that going into the hands of the Taliban. I think that's atrocious. Every year we send still several $100 million to the Palestinians, to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. We send it to a group that actually was funding martyrs, people who die killing Israelis. We're giving martyr funds from this fund that was being funded by the U.S. So I've actually recommended we go one step further. I don't think we should be giving any tax dollars. One, we have to borrow it. We don't even have enough money to pay for our own Social Security and Medicare. Why should we give any money to the Palestinians? And people say, oh, it's for humanitarian reasons. Well, you give your money then. I mean, it's there. This is borrowed money. We don't. It makes no sense to have humanitarian sort of nature or cause for something we don't have money for, that we're actually borrowing the money to send it to someone. So, no, I would go one step further than where we are now. I would cut off all funds to the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, any of these groups.
There's a big question about Iran here. There were reports that Iran helped Hamas militants plot this terror attack. Iran's Ayatollah says that's not true. Where do you stand on that? And what should we do if it is proven that Iran was behind this?
I think we should thoroughly investigate it and see if it's true or not true. We do know that they've admitted to giving funds. They're jumping up and down, gleefully clapping their hands at what happened. So we know where their sympathies are, or where their sick sympathies are. As far as the proof of whether or not they were a part of this, we should investigate it. We need to recall that, like, after 9/11, people were very mad. All of us were mad. If you live in New York, you got to imagine what the response still is towards thinking about 9/11. But there were people who quickly said it was Iraq. And then all of a sudden they're misdirecting us towards Iraq. And Iraq had a brutal dictator, Hussein, and everything, and everybody felt, but he really didn't have anything to do with 9/11. And yet people conflated the two.
Well, Vice President Cheney kept saying over and over again.
So I think we have to be wary of that. And I'm not one for rushing into things. I'm also not one for doing something without thinking of the unintended consequences. There are people in the Senate now, we won't name any names, Lindsey Graham, talking about bombing Tehran immediately. And the thing is the way our system works, our founding fathers so much disliked and wanted to prevent forever war, the ones that went on in Europe, that they put the war-making power in the legislature, and you have to have a vote. So people who are saying, let's bomb Tehran, they should be saying, let's go to Congress and ask permission to bomb Tehran. But then there would be a debate over this. We'd see the evidence. And there will be evidence, frankly. It's sort of like an airline crash. When they look at the missiles and the rockets that went in, they'll find serial numbers, they'll find who made the weapons, and they'll find out where they came from. And so I think all of that should be investigated. I'm not prepared to say exactly what we should do then. The other thing is Israel has already bombed Iran many times. Scientists have been killed. All this stuff's happened.
And targets in Syria as well.
Right. So we have to ask, did that work or did it make it worse? So people say, well, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Neither do I. Nobody does. But are they closer now than they were a year ago? Yeah, they're within 2 weeks of having enough uranium. People say, we're going to bomb their nuclear program out of bits. It takes about this much uranium. A cupful of uranium that's enriched to 90% is enough for a bomb. So do you think you could hide 10 cupfuls in 10 different places under 10 different mountains in Iran? I don't think, and most of the time the briefings I've gotten says you cannot militarily stop them. So then it gets to, what do we do?
Yeah.
I mean, is there something, but we shouldn't do something that's the opposite of what will be done well. So I don't know that I know the answer at this point, but I think it should be investigated. And at this point, I think the primary things are trying to free the hostages if we can, and then making sure that Hamas has no ability to do this again.
You talk about Congress. Is there nuance in that, though? The declaration of war versus an administration authorizing a series of airstrikes targeting, say, facilities that they say might be used for nuclear weapons. Wouldn't that be different?
Some say there is a difference. I'm sort of one who believes that if we're going to go to war with a country, even just dropping some bombs, we should have a vote in Congress. Some have said that the vote after 9/11 to authorize the use of force is enough for anything we do. And I don't think that's right, because I think about it. I have a good friend in my town. His son we've known, seen grow up. He's a second lieutenant. He's in the infantry. I don't think that he should be sent to fight a battle anywhere and die without me voting on it. Doesn't mean I vote against it or for it, but Congress should vote on that, because young people shouldn't be asked to die for something that was a vote. They're saying, oh, we voted on it after 9/11. Well, it has nothing to do with what's going on now. And I would have voted for the 9/11 authorization of use of force, but I don't believe it should mean that we never have to vote again. And then I can just say, oh, well, it's already voted on, I don't have to vote. No, I should have the responsibility, every representative, of voting yes or no on who we go to war with.
But wouldn't that take some element of surprise? Don't you need some element of surprise on airstrikes and certain things?
You can probably imagine some situations when it wouldn't. But it's also another reason for not going too far into what we're going to do to Iran, because anytime Israel has actually done it, they didn't announce before and they didn't claim afterwards who did it as well.
Right.
So they know the element of surprise and the element of secrecy, and they have their own system. But if, for example, we're going to be part of a bombing campaign of Gaza, whether it's justified or not, that should be a vote. We shouldn't be, they know it's coming, and it's in all likelihood coming from Israel. But if the U.S. were to be part of that, there needs to be a full-throated debate in our country, and we have to make a decision.
And what would get you to vote yes for that? What circumstance can you see that where the U.S. has to help Israel?
I think anytime, U.S. citizens are involved, it has something to do with it. Defending our country, people who have attacked our country. On 9/11, it was very clear-cut we were attacked. On Pearl Harbor, it was very clear-cut we were attacked. I don't think we should wish to be involved always in every war. And you can often be supportive without being directly involved with your troops. And I think at this point, Israel's received a great deal of help from us over many decades, and I think they're very capable. There's probably no more capable military other than ours in the world, to tell you the truth. And I think that Hamas is going to rue the day they did this.